I have an email from a woman and she has 4 separate stories. I really enjoyed reading this. I hope you guys enjoy it. All right, here we go. Let me put my good glasses on here. Now I can see the screen. I was born and raised in Southern Oregon, and I spent a lot of time in the Cascade Mountains growing up, fishing, hiking, hunting, exploring. You name the activity and I did it. My father spent 40 years working in the timber industry, many of those as a log truck driver. It wasn't out of the ordinary for me to ride along with him in the truck for the day, or for my mom and I to join him occasionally when he had to camp out in the woods because of work. I was a preteen at the time, and my mom and I joined my dad for a few days while he was working in the Marble Mountains. This encounter took place there. It was 35 miles out of Fort Jones, California. With my dad working as a log truck driver, anyone who knows anything about that knows it isn't unusual for those guys to be in bed by 7 p.m. and get up at 3 a.m. or earlier to start the day. At around midnight, my parents were asleep, and I was reading a book with my reading light in the camp trailer. What took place next changed me for the rest of my life. I was reading my book and I got a whiff of the famous foul smell everyone who has had an encounter knows about. The next thing I noticed was that the frogs and the crickets had gone dead silent. I knew there was a predator of some sort in the area, and I decided to shut off my light and take a look out the window to see what I could see. I got extremely lucky that night, as it was a full moon and it lit the woods up like daytime. I grew up in the era of the movie Harry and the Hendersons, and this got me obsessed with Bigfoot at a very young age. And when I peeked out the window, I knew exactly what I was looking at. 50 feet away, I saw the outline of a bipedal creature. He was just sitting back observing, but I could tell that he had places to be. I'm sure he was making a judgment on if it was safe to go on about his business. He was carrying a dead deer, probably to feed himself and his family. And I watched him cross the clearing behind our camp trailer, and he crossed the logging road, and then he strided up a steep bank like it was nothing. I didn't mention anything to my parents because my dad doesn't believe in Bigfoot, but the next morning I took my dad's tape measure and I measured from the ground to a branch on a tree where I saw his head roughly. Granted, I'm not an expert by any means, but I guesstimated him to be probably 8 feet tall. There were some footprints, and they were 18 inches long and 7 inches wide. Later that day, one of his co-workers and good friends showed up and said they found giant footprints at their campsite. They also found the fur of a deer that looked like it had been peeled right off the meat, just like you would tear a paper towel in the middle. The next day, my dad didn't have to work, so he and my mom and I joined some of his co-workers and their families at the nearby lake 3 miles up the road. There was a group of maybe 20 people, and everyone was fishing and visiting and hanging out and enjoying the day. And nothing happened until twilight. This is when I feel like we crossed over into their territory by the lake. As the sun was going down, we all started hearing tree knocks and getting closer and closer from all directions. And after that came the growls and the whoops and the howls. And when that didn't scare us off, that's when the rocks started being tossed in our direction. I'm talking big old mini boulders. One actually almost hit another kid who was around the same age as me, and it only missed him by maybe 6 inches. That's when everyone decided to load up their stuff and get the hell out of there. My mom and I left the next day while my dad and his co-workers had to stay up there another week or so. My dad said no one had any other encounters, but the rest of the time they were there, no one went back to the lake. The only thing the workers reported was what they found more footprints and heard more wood knocking and howling and whoop sounds. Story number 2. It was 2009 and I was 25 years old living in Applegate, Oregon. Ironically enough, I was on my way to see the famous Bigfoot trap. I had known about it since I was a kid and I was technically a local. I just never had the curiosity to check it out. But that day I was bored. I had the day off and there was nothing to do, so naturally I set off on an adventure in the outdoors. The Bigfoot trap located in Applegate is kind of an icon around these parts. It was built in the 1970s by a research team. Obviously they weren't successful in trapping a Bigfoot in it. You can easily Google the directions on how to get there or see pictures of it. But to my knowledge, because it had become such a tourist attraction and was becoming dilapidated, the Forest Service actually decided to restore it. So hey, I thought that was pretty cool in itself. I reached the trap and did my investigation, and I checked it out, and I crawled inside it and I looked around, and there wasn't anything super special about it. It was just a wooden box with a green grated slide mechanism for a door. It was just a normal day in the forest with all the forest critters making their noises. Birds were chirping away and frogs were croaking. And when I knew there was about an hour and a half left of daylight, I decided to head back to my car because it would take about that long to get back to the Heartish Picnic and parking area. Ooh, had trouble getting that out. When I turned around, I knew I was no longer alone. At first, I thought it might have been other hikers, but this was a day in the middle of the week, and I hadn't seen other human beings the entire 4 hours that I had been there. Everyone has heard that Bigfoot can mock other animals. Well, I can tell you that is 100% accurate. I heard whistling, but my trained ears knew it wasn't birds. They weren't close enough to me to smell yet, but the complete silence was enough to alert me to what I knew was present and watching me. I picked up a stick and hit the tree next to me 3 times, and it didn't surprise me when I got a response. And after that, I said loud enough for them to hear, "All right, guys, I know you're there. I'm not a threat, and I'm headed out of here anyway." I heard 2 more whistles behind me, and I started to walk out of there at a slow, steady pace. I was afraid of going too fast because I didn't want to trigger their predator instinct to chase me. As I walked along, I heard branches snapping directly behind me and off to the side, and I knew there was more than one. I proceeded further, and I heard a 3rd one come up on the other side, and the more of them that I heard surround me, the more freaked out I got. But I just kept moving forward. I just knew my little 9mm wouldn't protect me if the situation were to go south. The forest going through here isn't super dense and you can catch occasional things through the trees. I'm pretty sure it was comical to watch me walking and trying to remain calm as I talked to them and tried to seem as non-threatening as possible. I think they have a sense of humor and like to mess with us humans very often. And now, 11 years later, I think that is what this trio was doing. I was scared and I was nervous, but I didn't feel threatened. I never got to see the one behind me, but I had a feeling that he was the pack leader, so to speak. I got a peek of the 2 on the other side of me, though. The first one was to my right, and it looked younger than the others, and the sounds it made were quieter by comparison. I got a mischievous vibe from this creature. It wasn't more than 6 feet tall, and it had wide shoulders, and it looked about 400 pounds. Maybe that was a small female. I saw the second one on my left a whole lot better. I don't think he was trying to hide anyway, because he was a good-sized one, and he was not shy in the slightest. He was only maybe 20 yards from me, if that, and I stopped and I turned my head and I said to him, "Easy, big guy. I see you and I respect you." He and I made eye contact, and I gazed at him for roughly 30 seconds. His hair was black, and he was at least 7.5 feet tall and 4 feet at the shoulders, and I'm guessing he was 700 to 800 pounds. And while we were doing a stare down, he stepped forward to let me know that he was not afraid of me, and in response I repeated my words and continued to walk toward my car. They stayed with me for probably another 5 minutes and proceeded with their business once they figured out I was not a threat. I thanked them for the escort and protection, whether that is what they were doing or not, and when I was only 500 feet from my car, they disappeared back into the forest. I kind of regret not being able to see the third one, but I knew he was behind me. I was doing everything I could to not make them mad or put them on alert, and that's why I didn't turn around to look at him. Something told me that would have been a mistake. All right, here is her story number 3. It was October of 2015 and hunting season was in. I was 30 years old at the time, and the location was in the middle of the woods in no man's land out of Prospect, Oregon. I was by myself and going to use my usual hunting spot that my family and close friends had frequented for 3 generations. It was early in the morning, between 5 and 6 a.m., and I was sitting up in a tree stand looking for wildlife. I was armed with a Remington 308 with a scope. Based on my past experiences, I was alert to any sign of Bigfoot that might be in the area. But as I spent the day up in the stand, scanning the area and looking for any sign of game without any luck, I was comforted by the sounds of the birds and the other animals, knowing if something dangerous were nearby, they would have gone quiet by now. Night was coming up on me quickly, and I decided to head back to camp, which was less than a half a mile away. And when I got there, I found nothing out of the ordinary and still no sign of any predators or Bigfoot. The first night was quiet, and I heard some wood knocking and chirps, so I knew they were nearby, but the night went smoothly and without any problems. On day 2, I went back to my tree stand and had a day like the one before with little action on both the wildlife and the Bigfoot fronts. But that night, I got a little entertainment. The wood knocks and the chirps were louder and they were closer, and I could hear them chatter amongst themselves. I figured there were at least 3 of them based on the different tones and sounds of the chatter. And again, based on past experience, I thought it couldn't hurt to let them know that I was there, that I was only trying to get some food and that I was not a threat. It may have helped me because even though I caught one of their outlines among the trees in the light of my fire, I knew they were just watching me, and the night went smoothly. Day 3 was the same, but by the time I got back to my camp later in the day, it had been destroyed. The food I had hanged up in the trees was gone, and they had gotten into my ice chest, and all its contents were gone or spread out over my campsite, and the rest of my items were knocked over and scattered everywhere. And when I saw my tent had been wrecked and shredded, I got pretty hacked off, and I yelled at them, and I told them it wasn't the right thing to do since I didn't mean them any harm. Looking back, their destruction of my camp was probably a warning to get out. Of course, I didn't take the hint, and I stayed the night anyway. The third night progressed, and the situation escalated. The wood knocks were my first warning. They were loud and hard and aggressive, and they were constant, like every 10 minutes, and they got closer and closer. And when that didn't scare me off, they started throwing rocks, and they came from all directions at me, and they were mixed in with the occasional small logs and large branches. I yelled at them again and told them to stop, and I reminded them that they had destroyed all my gear besides my sleeping bag, and when morning came that I would be gone. And I tried to sound as confident as I could, but I won't lie, I was pretty scared. With me yelling at them and telling them to back off, they got silent for a little while, just long enough for me to fall into a good sleep. And then a couple hours later, they started throwing rocks again. They were even closer than before, and I knew I was surrounded. And I fired a warning shot with my pistol, and I told them to back off. And after that, I heard growls and chatter that vibrated through my whole body, and I told them to back off again and that I would be heading out at first light. They went silent again, just long enough for me to fall back asleep one more time, and then my blaring alarm clock woke me up just as the sun was shining its first rays into the dark sky. and as I fumbled to turn it off, I heard the thudding of huge pounding footsteps coming right at me, and I silenced the alarm, and when I looked in the direction of the footsteps, I saw the largest Bigfoot I had ever seen coming straight at me. Now, I might be exaggerating because of how scared I was, but this one was 10 feet tall or taller, and his shoulders were 5 or 6 feet wide, and he was easily over 800 pounds. He was a big one. I felt the whole forest vibrate as he came at me, and I fired 2 warning shots to get him to stop, but he didn't. I grabbed my rifle and I started heading down the hill to my car. It was parked on the main road and at least a mile away, and I waddled as fast as I could go because, to be honest, I'm a fat woman and my ass doesn't run. You go, girl. She's a fat woman and she ain't running. The tree branches were cracking and snapping as this guy mowed down through the forest behind me, pushing and scaring me out. I knew he was going slow because he could have caught up with me in just a few strides if he wanted to. When I was halfway to my car, I had had enough, and I stopped and I turned around, and amazingly enough, he stopped too. I pulled my rifle out and had him in the crosshairs of my scope, right dead on his forehead in the center. I had a clear shot, and I looked into his eyes and I saw nothing but rage and anger that I was there, even though I wasn't a threat to him and his family by any means. I was just about to pull the trigger when I heard another boom coming from my side, and I stole a horrified look to my right and I saw another one, just as angry and pissed off as the other guy, and he was coming right at me. I thought I was a goner for sure. I did the only thing I could do. I strapped my rifle back on my shoulder and I started running as fast as I could go. And all I could hear was the stomps of their thunderous steps and the shaking of the damn earth under my feet. It felt like an eternity, but I finally reached my car. I couldn't open the door fast enough, and as I got inside, I saw both of them at the edge of the tree line. And that's when the loudest, most fearsome growl and howl I've ever heard reverberated through the entire forest, and I swear it made my heart skip a beat, and I felt like I was having a minor heart attack. They let me live that day, even though they could have easily taken me out in nothing flat. I've been going to this hunting spot every year my entire life, and I never saw signs of Bigfoot being in that area. My friends and family didn't report anything strange either. And over the last decade or more, the wildlife has changed. And what I mean by that is the last successful hunting trip any of us had was over 10 years ago. I've not seen any type of game animal in this spot for years. I haven't even seen a bear or a cougar. And the only signs of wildlife are the birds and the small rodents. And in my nearly 30 years of going here, this was the first time I had ever noticed signs of Bigfoot, and it makes me think that they must have put a claim on this area as their territory recently. I haven't been back to that spot, nor will I ever go back. This encounter scared the living daylights out of me, and I'm not sharing my encounter to scare people. I'm sharing it because my story should add some first-hand insight that Bigfoot are not little puppies and kittens. They can be aggressive and territorial, and if they feel the need, they can take a human out with no problem. I know I'm not the only person on Earth who has had terrifying encounters like this, but I'm still afraid to reveal what happened to me to anyone. I want to warn people about spending time out here, but knowing they won't believe me, I won't bother. And now here is her fourth and last story. As if this hasn't been exciting enough so far, she's got another story, so let's do it. Let's do this. I lived in central Ohio for several years, and I frequented a cemetery in the local area. To reach the cemetery, you had to hike down a driveway about a mile. The cemetery closes at dusk, and the cops patrol it because of its reputation and the rituals that have taken place here. I've had several types of encounters in this cemetery, but those are stories for another time. So for now, I want to tell you about the Bigfoot ghost. The first time I saw this ghost was on my first visit to the cemetery. It was nighttime, and I was there with 3 friends who had each grown up visiting and frequenting the cemetery on a regular basis. I was walking around and shining my flashlight and reading the headstones, and I could hear footsteps of a large creature nearby in the woods. I shined my flashlight into the trees, but I didn't see anything. My friends and I were spread apart throughout the cemetery and not really close to each other, and none of them were big enough to make that much noise. I continued to walk around and read the headstones, and I could hear this Bigfoot tromping through the trees. I could hear it breathing heavy and staying in the shadows, and it followed me. I kept shining my flashlight through the trees to see if I could catch a glimpse of him, and I finally did. I saw a ghostly apparition with black, hollowed-out eyes resembling a Bigfoot. One of the ladies that I was with, she saw it too and took off screaming and running toward the car, and her reaction made the rest of us decide to call it a night and get out of there. The second time I encountered this Bigfoot ghost, I went to the cemetery on Halloween night to do a Ouija board reading with 3 sisters who were witches. And as we were doing the reading, I had a recorder going as well as my digital camera taking continuous pictures and set up to motion record. And I could hear the Bigfoot ghost walking around in the tree line, and I could hear his heavy breathing again, but I didn't see him. I was leaving and walking down the highway, and I could hear him walking off to the side of me. And when I got home that night, I reviewed the audio recordings and the images that my camera got. The audio recorded some grunts, Bigfoot-like chatter, and a couple of howls. My camera caught the ghost apparition in 3 different shots. Unfortunately, though, when I left Ohio, I had to leave a lot of personal items at my ex's house. That was 7 years ago, and I'm sure my things, including my ghostly images, have been thrown away by now. The third time I encountered the Bigfoot ghost was right before I left the state. I was there doing my standard thing of reading the headstones and seeing if I could catch anything on audio, pictures, or video, but I could tell there was something different in the air. There was an ominous and dark feeling that I had never experienced there before. And after I had been there for about an hour, I saw a disturbing shadow figure that came right at me. It chased me out of the cemetery, but just as strange, after I crossed a certain point, it was like the shadow had hit a brick wall and couldn't go any further. It let out a horrible scream like a ghostly banshee, and when I turned to see it, I saw the Bigfoot ghost right behind me, and I froze, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The Bigfoot ghost growled at the shadow figure, and the thing disappeared. I stammered a shaky thank you to the Bigfoot ghost, and after observing me for a few seconds, it turned around and disappeared into the trees. I looked back in disbelief in the direction the shadow figure had disappeared, and then looked at the trees where the Bigfoot faded away, knowing I would never be able to tell anyone what I had seen. Mysterious events have plagued my entire life, and as usual, I added my experience that night to the long list of things that no one will ever believe. They never do. Yes, I will agree with that last sentence. You have been plagued your entire life with mysterious stuff, mainly things with Bigfoot. And the Ouija board stuff, are you a witch? I'm just curious. These stories are, I think I got these back in 2023 maybe 2020, maybe even 2022. I'm just now getting to them. She actually sent them in 4 separate emails, and as I was digging through emails, they happen to all still be one right after another. I'm glad of that, because when people do that and they add to their story 3 or 4 days later, there's been 20 emails jump in between them, and when I'm looking for stories, I'll miss them. But I was lucky on this one. Anyway, I thought this was exciting. Man, she's had Bigfoot experiences all her life. How do y'all do that? I can't even see a broken twig to where I could even fake it and say, yeah, Bigfoot did that. I mean, I never see anything. I just see normal stuff in the woods. Turtles and snakes and squirrels and raccoons and deer and Never a Bigfoot. I never see a Bigfoot. I guess I'm just jinxed. All right, thank you to the writer for sending this story. It was wonderful. That's going to do it for this podcast. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks again.